The champagne glass slipped from Selim Arden's fingers. It didn't shatter. It just tilted, tipped sideways on the marble ledge, settled there like it couldn't decide whether to fall. That was the moment he saw it. Across the open floor of the island villa, past the investment bankers in fitted suits and the women draped in borrowed diamonds, past the string lights reflecting off the bay and the low jazz humming through the speakers, Khyven Drace had another man's face in his hands. And he was kissing him. Not a glance. Not a mistake. A full, slow, deliberate kiss. Right there. In the middle of the party. In the middle of people who knew both their names. Selim's chest locked up. His throat worked silently. He pressed one hand flat against the terrace door and just stood there, because his legs had stopped taking instructions from his brain. The ocean wind off the bay moved through the open panels and carried the scent of salt and night-blooming jasmine. It was a beautiful evening. That detail made it worse. The villa glittered. The guests circled each other with cocktails and quiet conversations about mergers. Someone laughed near the bar. A full, bright sound. The music kept going. Nobody stopped. Nobody turned. The world just kept moving like nothing had cracked open at the center of the room. Selim had known something was wrong for weeks. The distance at dinner. The phone calls taken in the hallway. The way Khyven looked at him. Through him, like Selim was furniture that had started to bore him. But Selim had told himself it was stress. Business pressure. The deals Khyven was chasing across 4 time zones. He had believed that. He wished he hadn't believed that. The man Khyven was kissing was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a stone-gray suit. He laughed softly when the kiss broke. A comfortable laugh. The kind that said this wasn't new. Selim couldn't speak. Not because of the shock. He had never been able to speak. Not since birth. His voice didn't exist the way other people's did. He was a mute omega in a world that already undervalued omegas who could speak. So he had learned to carry himself with stillness, with precision, with a kind of quiet presence that people either respected or completely dismissed. Khyven Drace had always claimed he respected it. Hi viewers. Have you ever stayed in a situation longer than you should have, just because you kept making excuses for someone else's behavior? Drop your answer in the comments, I want to know. Selim's hand pressed harder against the glass door. His reflection stared back at him. Polished suit, silver cufflinks, eyes that were starting to fill. He blinked, held it together. He had done that his whole life. Held it together in rooms that didn't make space for him. But something else was happening on the far side of the room. 3 men stood near the entrance. Not guests. Not staff. They weren't circulating. They weren't holding drinks. They were just standing side by side, watching the room the way men watch something they already own. All 3 wore black suits. All 3 had the same sharp, still face. Same height. Same posture. Same expression, which was almost no expression at all. Selim noticed them the way you notice something that doesn't fit. The party flowed around them like water moving around stone. A few guests glanced their way and then looked somewhere else quickly. Like looking too long was a risk. Selim didn't know who they were. But something in his chest, something below the grief, shifted. Because the man in the center of the 3 was not watching the kiss. He was not watching Khyven. He was watching Selim. Directly, calmly, with a stillness that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition. Selim didn't understand that yet. He would. Across the room, Khyven finally pulled back from the kiss and turned, almost casually, and found Selim's eyes through the crowd. No guilt crossed his face, just a faint, tired impatience. Like Selim's reaction was an inconvenience he'd already calculated for. He lifted one hand and gave a slow, dismissive wave. Go away. That gesture. That small, careless gesture hit harder than the kiss. Because the kiss could have been weakness. Heat. A mistake wrapped in a bad night. But the wave was a choice. Clear and deliberate and cold. Selim's jaw tightened. He didn't move. He kept his hand pressed to the glass and kept his eyes steady, even while his chest felt like it was caving in slowly from the inside. And then, from the far end of the room, the man in the center of the three turned to say something low to his brothers. Then he took one step forward. Just one. But the room felt it. And Selim felt it too. That shift in pressure, like the air just before a storm decides which direction it's going. Something was about to change. He just didn't know yet that it was going to change everything. The kiss didn't stop. That was the thing Selim kept not being able to process. It deepened. Right there, under the string lights and the jazz and the conversations about quarterly projections. Khyven Drace pulled the man closer by the back of his neck, and the kiss became something longer, slower, more deliberate. Like a statement, like he wanted it witnessed. And the room let it happen. That was the second thing. No one intervened. No one turned away. They adjusted. They recalibrated their eye lines and continued their conversations at slightly different angles, the way people do when they've collectively agreed that something uncomfortable is not their problem. One woman near the bar smiled into her glass. A man in a navy blazer just kept talking louder, filling the space. Only one person said anything out loud. It came from somewhere behind Selim's left shoulder. Low, amused, meant to carry. Relax. The Omega can't even complain. Laughter followed. Quiet, tucked away laughter. The kind people do when they think it's too small to count. Selim didn't turn around. He stared straight ahead and breathed through it. The ocean wind came through the terrace panels again, cooler now, pressing against his collar, against the back of his hands. The moonlight lay flat and silver across the marble floor. He had been in rooms like this before. Rooms where his silence made him invisible. Where being a mute Omega meant people forgot to watch their words because they assumed their words wouldn't land anywhere that mattered. They always landed. He just never had the option to prove it. Khyven finally broke the kiss and leaned back, straightening his jacket with one hand. Casual. Unbothered. He said something to the man beside him that made the man smile. Then he looked across the room. Found Selim. And for just a second, one single second, something crossed Khyven's face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite arrogance. It was calculation. He was measuring the damage. Deciding how much management this moment would require. Then he crossed the room. Not hurrying. Walking the way men walk when they want the room to see that they're not worried. He stopped in front of Selim. Close. Lowered his voice. Don't make this a scene. Selim looked at him. He could not speak. But his eyes said everything they'd ever said. Steady, clear, full of something that Khyven had spent years pretending not to see. Go back to the suite, Khyven said. We'll talk later. He said it the way people say things they have no intention of following through on. Then he turned and walked away, back toward the other man, back toward the string lights and the investors and the easy laughter. Selim stood there. His hands were flat at his sides. His breathing was even. From the outside, he probably looked composed. He was not composed. There's a particular kind of pain that lives in public humiliation. Not the sharp pain of a wound, something slower. The kind that settles in while you're still standing upright, while you're still holding your expression together, while the music is still playing and people around you are pretending they didn't hear what just happened to you. That was the pain Selim was carrying right now. And underneath it, something else. Anger. Not the hot, visible kind. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't shake or raise its voice. The kind that waits. He pressed 2 fingers against the inside of his wrist and focused on his own heartbeat. Something he'd learned to do when rooms became too much. Ground himself. Stay present. When he looked up, the 3 men were still there. Closer now. They had moved, not dramatically, just drifted. And now they stood at a position where the central man had a clean line of sight to Selim across the room. He was still watching. Not the way people watched a scene unfold for entertainment. The way someone watches when they are deciding something. One of the other guests, an older man with silver-streaked hair, a shipping investor Selim had met twice before, passed near the three men and then visibly changed direction. Walked a wider path, kept his chin slightly down. He recognized them, and that recognition was fear. But the central man's attention never moved from Selim. Selim had no idea who they were. He did not understand yet why one of those men was watching him with something in his expression that looked almost like concern. Not pity, concern. The difference mattered. He would understand it soon, because in about 3 minutes those three men were going to walk to the center of this room. And nothing about this party was going to be the same after that. The room changed before they even spoke. That was the only way to describe it. The three men moved away from the entrance and walked into the center of the villa floor, and something in the air went tight, the way a room tightens when someone powerful enters who was not expected and was not invited and is not pretending otherwise. The jazz kept playing, but conversations shortened, voices dropped, glasses paused mid-air, eyes moved, then quickly moved away. Khyven noticed them from across the room. His expression shifted, just slightly, just for a moment, and the man beside him followed his gaze and went still. The three men stopped near the center of the floor. Side by side, three faces, identical, dark eyes, sharp jawlines, skin like polished mahogany. A deep, rich brown that caught the light in the same way on all three faces. They were tall, broad through the shoulders. They wore their black suits like armor they'd stopped thinking about years ago. But they did not look around the room with curiosity. They looked around it with ownership. That was the difference. One of the guests leaned toward his companion and whispered something. His companion gave a very small, very fast shake of his head. Don't. Selim was watching from the terrace side. He didn't know their names. He didn't know why the room was reacting this way. But his body knew, the way bodies pick up on power before the brain catches up, that something fundamental had shifted in this space. Khyven set down his drink. He crossed the floor toward them. Selim watched him do it. Watched the way Khyven walked, the slight adjustment in his shoulders, the way he was composing his expression into something easy and confident. That walk, that smile. He'd seen Khyven use that walk on rivals, on investors, on men who needed to be handled. He closed the distance and extended a hand. Gentlemen, I wasn't expecting you tonight. This is a private gathering. The central man looked at Khyven's outstretched hand. Did not take it. Zephyr Valtteri, said the one on the left by way of introduction. His voice was even, low. Dorian Valtteri, said the one on the right. And then the one in the center, the one who had been watching Selim, said, Alaric Valtteri. The name hit the room like a dropped stone in still water. Ripples spread outward. Someone near the bar made a quiet sound and then covered it. Another guest physically stepped back. The silver-haired shipping investor set his drink down on a surface without looking and started moving. Not obviously, just repositioning himself toward the far end of the room. Khyven's smile stayed in place, but his jaw had gone tight. The Valtteri name was not unknown in his world. The Valtteri Syndicate operated across Atlantic shipping lanes. They controlled port access in 4 major maritime corridors. Their holdings ran through 14 shell companies across 3 continents. Legitimate on the surface, shipping, logistics, coastal development, and underneath the kind of arrangement that kept other powerful people from asking too many questions. They were not criminals in the messy sense. They were the kind of organization that made the rules that criminals followed. And they were standing in Khyven Drace's party. Alaric Valtteri had not looked at Khyven since he said his name. He was looking at Selim. Selim, still standing near the terrace doors, fingers pressed against the glass. Tears dried now, but eyes still carrying the weight of everything the last 20 minutes had dropped on him. Something in Alaric's expression moved. Not obviously. Just a small tightening around the eyes. A shift in the line of his mouth. Recognition. Genuine recognition. Like he was confirming something he already knew. Khyven stepped slightly to the side, trying to redirect. I'm not aware of any scheduled. No, Alaric said, still not looking at him. You wouldn't be. A pause. Then, quietly, in a voice clearly meant for the whole room to catch the edge of interesting behavior. Inside my house. Khyven's smile broke. Just for a second. But everyone in that room saw it break. Your house. Khyven said it the way men say things they want to sound confident about. Flat, firm, a little too fast. Alaric Valteri finally looked at him. The lease on this property runs through a coastal development holding group, registered in the Cayman Islands, refiled under a subsidiary 18 months ago. A pause. That subsidiary is mine. Khyven opened his mouth. Alaric kept going. The marina. He gestured toward the bay. The private dock. The security firm contracted to this property. Another pause. All Valteri Holdings. The silence in the room was total now. Someone had turned down the music. Selim didn't see who. It just happened. And the jazz faded out softly until there was nothing left but the sound of the ocean outside and the faint clink of a glass someone carefully set down. Khyven's expression went through three things in 4 seconds. Disbelief. Calculation. Controlled anger. That's an administrative matter, he said. It has nothing to do with this evening. Alaric tilted his head slightly. You're holding a party in a property you don't own. A beat. And conducting yourself in a way that reflects on the people who do. His voice stayed level. It didn't rise. It didn't need to. The investors in the room understood what was happening. They understood it immediately, the way people who operate in high-stakes financial circles understand when political ground has shifted beneath their feet. Khyven Drace was an influential name, mergers, acquisitions, shipping routes. But the Valteri Syndicate controlled the infrastructure that made those shipping routes possible. You did not insult Valteri Holdings. You did not insult Valteri Protection. And right now, Khyven Drace had apparently done both. 3 guests drifted toward the exit. Quietly, like they had somewhere they just remembered they needed to be. Dorian and Zephyr had not moved. They stood just behind Alaric, not flanking him aggressively, not performing power, just present. The way a wall is present. Khyven's business partner, a broad man named Hendricks who had been his right hand through 6 years of deals, was across the room with his phone out, typing something. Not good. But Khyven was still standing his ground. He had not built everything he had by backing down in rooms. I've done business with Valteri-linked ports for 4 years, he said, voice tightening. I don't think this needs to become a confrontation. It isn't a confrontation, Alaric said simply, and then he walked, not toward Khyven, toward Selim. The room watched it happen with the kind of attention people give moments that feel like they're about to become stories later. Selim stood at the terrace doors, back straight, expression carefully still. His eyes tracked Alaric as he crossed the floor. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't understand why this man, who had just dismantled Khyven's authority in front of a roomful of investors with 4 calm sentences, was walking toward him. Alaric stopped in front of him, not close enough to crowd, just close enough to make the gesture clear. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, drew out a folded silk handkerchief, dark blue, clean, pressed, and held it out. Selim stared at it, not at Alaric, at the handkerchief, because that simple gesture held something in it that he hadn't encountered in this room all night, maybe in a very long time. Acknowledgement, not sympathy, not the performative concern of someone trying to look like a good person in front of an audience. Just, you've been crying. Here. Selim took it slowly, his fingers pressed into the silk. Alaric said nothing for a moment. Then, low enough that only Selim could hear it. You should not be standing alone right now. Across the room, Khyven watched this exchange. And for the first time tonight, something in his face looked less like arrogance and more like unease. Because the omega he had waved off with one hand 20 minutes ago was now holding a silk handkerchief given to him by Alaric Valteri. And Alaric Valteri did not hand his handkerchief to people who didn't matter. Alaric didn't explain himself to the room. He never did. But Zephyr stepped slightly to the side and said something low to a man near the wall. One of the security staff, Selim realized now, one of the men he'd assumed all evening worked for Khyven. The man nodded and moved away. Dorian had his phone out, quiet, reading something. The party had effectively stopped existing. It still technically occupied the room. The guests were still there, the glasses were still in hands, but no one was pretending anymore. This had become a different kind of gathering. The kind where you stayed because leaving too fast was its own kind of statement. Khyven crossed his arms. I'd like to understand why you're this interested in my Omega. The word landed wrong. It always had. Selim had felt it for years, the particular way Khyven used that phrasing, not as identity but as inventory. My Omega. Like a car. Like a portfolio asset. Alaric turned. His expression didn't harden. It just went very, very still. Your Omega, he repeated. Not a question. Just the phrase, repeated back, given space to sit and be heard by everyone in the room. Then Alaric looked at Selim. How long have you known Selim Ardent? He asked. Not to Khyven. To the room. To no one in particular. Then he said, because I have. The quiet in the room shifted. Alaric reached into his jacket and withdrew a small card. He didn't show it around. He looked at Selim directly. 7 years ago, he said. A federal trafficking operation. Omega victims held across 3 coastal locations, moved through private marina routes. The investigation had stalled. He paused. Someone inside passed written notes to our field contacts. Detailed, accurate, actionable. They identified routes, schedules, personnel movement. They couldn't speak, so they wrote. Another pause. And because of what they wrote, 41 people were recovered. And one of my brothers did not die. The room held its breath. Selim's eyes had gone still. Not surprised, he knew the memory. He lived with it. But hearing it said out loud, in a room full of people who had watched him get waved off like a distraction 20 minutes ago, something in his chest pulled tight. That person was never identified publicly, Alaric continued. They didn't ask for anything. They just kept passing information until the operation was done. Then they disappeared back into silence. He looked at Selim. I found out who it was 3 years later. Khyven's arms had uncrossed. His expression was doing something complicated, the kind of thing faces do when they've badly miscalculated and are only just now measuring the full distance of the error. Dorian had put his phone away. He was watching Selim now the same way Alaric had watched him from across the room all evening, with a kind of focused, specific attention that wasn't aggressive but wasn't casual either. Zephyr's expression had shifted too. Something in it that looked almost like warmth. Real warmth. The kind that didn't perform for a room. Selim stood with the silk handkerchief pressed between both hands. He couldn't speak. He could never speak. But his face was open right now in a way that his face didn't usually let itself be in public. The careful composure had cracked, not into grief, but into something more complicated. He had done that thing 7 years ago and told no one. He had just done what he could with what he had. He hadn't expected anyone to remember. One of the investors near the back, a woman with sharp eyes and a conservative suit, someone Selim had seen Khyven court aggressively for 2 months, leaned slightly toward the colleague beside her. Her expression had changed. She was reassessing, not just the room, him. Alaric's gaze had not moved from Selim. You should not be treated like this, he said. Quiet, direct, not a performance. Khyven heard it. The whole room heard it. And what made it devastating, what made it worse than any confrontation, any raised voice, any direct accusation, was that it was just a sentence. Simple, true. Said in a room full of people who had watched the whole evening and said nothing. Khyven took a step forward. This is between him and me, he said, voice harder now, starting to lose its professional edge. Whatever history you're claiming doesn't give you standing in our relationship. Alaric's brothers moved. Not aggressively, just forward. 1 step each. Together. A wall reminding the room it existed. Alaric didn't look at Khyven. He was still looking at Selim. And then, low level, carrying just far enough for the people closest to hear. You are speaking about someone under our protection. Khyven stopped. The room stopped. And Selim, for the first time in 7 years of being spoken about, around and over, felt the weight of those words fall over him like something solid. Not a gift. Not charity. A statement of fact. From people who did not say things they didn't mean. And Khyven Drace, who had built his entire empire on reading power correctly, finally understood that he had made a mistake tonight he could not walk back. The question now was how much it was going to cost him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it yet. He would. And when he did, the night was going to get considerably worse. Here are chapters 6 to 10, completing your full story. Khyven's phone buzzed again. He still didn't look at it. Because looking at it right now, in front of these men, in front of this room, would be an admission. That something was moving without his permission. That pieces were shifting on a board he thought he controlled. So he kept his eyes forward. And he made his second mistake of the evening. I don't know what history you think you have with him, Khyven said, voice harder now. The professional edges were starting to crack. But Selim is my partner. That's a private relationship. And whatever you're doing right now, coming in here, making claims about property, inserting yourself into something that has nothing to do with you. He stopped, because Alaric had turned to look at him. Just turned. That was all. But the quality of that attention, the complete, unhurried focus of it, made Khyven's next sentence disappear before he could form it. Alaric said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, you kissed another man in front of your partner in a room full of witnesses. A pause. Then waved him away when he reacted. Flat. Factual. Like reading from a report. And now you're telling me this is private. The room felt that. The woman investor near the back had stopped pretending to look somewhere else. She was watching openly now. The silver-haired shipping man had gone completely still. Even Khyven's business partner Hendrix had put his phone face down on the surface beside him and crossed his arms. Khyven's jaw tightened. That's between us. You made it public, Alaric said. You chose the room. You chose the audience. A pause. Those were your choices, not his. Zephyr and Dorian hadn't moved. They didn't need to. Their presence was architectural at this point. They were part of the structure of the moment. Not a threat display, but something quieter and more final. Khyven turned towards Selim. His voice dropped, shifted into something softer, more controlled. The voice he used when he needed to redirect a situation through personal appeal. Selim, you know what this is. Don't let strangers pull you into something. Selim looked at him. Just looked. And whatever Khyven saw in that look, whatever he found in those steady, dry, exhausted eyes, stopped the sentence completely. Because Selim's face wasn't angry. It wasn't devastated. It was done. Not the dramatic done of a breakup scene. The quiet done of someone who had been done for a long time and had just run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. Khyven tried again. This is. Some people confuse love with possession, Alaric said. Not loudly. Just present. Into the space Khyven's voice had left. The room absorbed that sentence. You could see it land on different faces differently. The investors processed it as context. The woman in the back processed it as something personal. A small private flinch crossed her face before she smoothed it away. Hendrix picked his phone back up. Khyven noticed. The 3 Valteri brothers stepped slightly closer together. Not advancing, just consolidating, and said something to each other in voices too low to carry. Whatever they said, it was brief. And when they looked back up, something had been decided. Zephyr glanced at Dorian. Dorian gave a very small nod. Then Alaric looked once more at Khyven, and said quietly, calm as a closed door, you are speaking about someone under our protection. Khyven's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because those words, in that order, from that name, they weren't a challenge. They were a line. and the entire room understood what it meant to have crossed it. The phone buzz came a third time, and this time Khyven looked. He couldn't help it. The instinct was stronger than the optics. When your business is the size of his, when you have that many moving parts, a phone that won't stop is a problem that doesn't wait for convenient moments. He glanced at the screen. His face didn't change, but his breathing did. Just slightly. The notification was from his assistant, Priya. The message was 4 words. 3 contracts just froze. That was all. No explanation. No context. Just those 4 words sitting on his screen like a crack in a wall you weren't expecting to find. Khyven locked the phone, put it back in his pocket, kept his expression steady. He was good at that. It was one of his actual skills, the ability to receive devastating information in a public setting and let nothing visible cross his face. He had done it in boardrooms, in courtrooms, once in a yacht harbor in Ken when a deal worth 40 million collapsed via a 2-line email. He had kept his face then. He kept it now. But his mind was running calculations at full speed. 3 contracts frozen in under 30 minutes. From the moment the Valteri brothers walked into this room. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a demonstration. Quiet, efficient, surgical. This is what we can do. No raised voices. No threats. No drama. Just 3 frozen contracts and a forward text. Alaric was still in the room. Still watching, not moving toward anything or away from anything. Just standing with his brothers like men who had all the time in the world because time, at a certain level of power, stopped being a pressure and became a resource. Dorian was on his phone now, typing something. Zephyr was looking at Khyven the way you look at a structure you're deciding whether to repair or demolish. Across the room, the investors were doing the math. Selim could see it happening, the subtle reconfiguration of allegiances. The woman near the back had moved. She was now standing closer to the exit, and she had put distance between herself and Hendrix, which was notable because they had arrived together. The silver-haired shipping man had physically turned his back to Khyven's side of the room. Not dramatically, just redirected himself. Khyven's shipping empire operated through 6 major port corridors on the Atlantic seaboard. 2 of them were tied to Valteri-connected logistics infrastructure. Something that had always been a background fact, a footnote in operational documents, the kind of thing that doesn't feel like a vulnerability until the moment it does. Right now it felt like a vulnerability, because Khyven had spent years believing that his financial volume made him protected, that the sheer size of his business was a kind of armor, too big to touch, too woven into too many other things to be cleanly targeted. He had not accounted for the possibility that the most powerful entity in those corridors might have a personal reason to care about the outcome of this particular evening. Arrogance, Alaric said. Not to anyone specifically, not loudly, just out into the room. Often walks into traps it built for others. Nobody responded. Nobody disagreed. Hendrix had moved away from Khyven's side of the room. The movement was slow and natural-looking. He picked up a fresh drink from a server's tray, drifted 2 steps left, drifted 2 more. But he was creating distance and everyone could see it, including Khyven. He turned back toward Alaric. His voice, when it came, was quieter now, stripped of performance. "What do you want?" Alaric glanced at him, then back at Selim. "I already told you," he said, and he walked toward Selim again. Behind him, Khyven's phone buzzed a 4th time. He looked. His assistant again. Hendrix just left the building. He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket very slowly and stood there in the middle of his own party. In a villa that didn't belong to him, surrounded by investors who were rearranging their loyalties in real time. And for the first time tonight, Khyven Drace looked like a man who understood the full size of what he'd done. Alaric stopped in front of Selim. Not rushed. Not performing. Just present. The way certain people are present, fully and completely, like they've shut everything else out and you are the only thing in the room that matters right now. Selim looked up at him. Alaric said, "You can stay here tonight." A pause. "Or you can leave with us." He didn't say it quietly enough to be secretive. The people closest could hear it, and the people closest had been listening to everything all evening and would hear this too. But the way he said it mattered. No pressure in it. No urgency. No weight of expectation or debt. Just here are two options. One of them is a door. You decide which one you walk through. Selim had not made a real choice for himself in a long time. That was the truth of it. Not because he was weak, nothing about him was weak, but because the architecture of his life with Khyven had slowly, over years, removed the habit of choosing. Khyven made decisions. Khyven set schedules. Khyven determined what the evenings looked like, which events they attended, how Selim presented himself in rooms like this one. Not through force. Through assumption. The assumption that Selim's preference was whatever Khyven preferred. And Selim, who had grown up in a world that underestimated him before he opened his mouth, who never had the option of loud objection, had let it happen gradually the way you let water rise gradually, a little more each season, until one day you look down and you are standing in something over your head. He stood with the silk handkerchief in both hands. He looked at the door, then back at Alaric, then at the room, all the people, all the carefully repositioned bodies, all the faces trying to look like they weren't watching every move Selim made. Freedom. The first moment of real freedom often doesn't feel like relief. Feels terrifying. Like stepping off a ledge you've been standing on so long you forgot it was a ledge. Selim took a slow breath, and then Khyven's hand closed around his wrist. Hard. Fast. Without warning. The room reacted. A sharp intake of breath from someone near the center. A dropped sentence from the corner of the room. A sound that cut itself short. You're not going anywhere. Khyven's voice had lost all of its polish. This was something rawer now. Not love. Not desperation. Something that looked like control trying to disguise itself as both. His grip on Selim's wrist tightened. Zephyr moved first. One step. That was all. But the shift in his posture said everything. The kind of shift that means the next step is not going to be just a step. Dorian closed his phone. Alaric did not look at Khyven. He looked at Selim's wrist. At Khyven's hand on it. And then he looked at Khyven slowly, fully, and the temperature of that look was something the entire room felt. No anger in it. Anger would have been easier. This was something colder. This was the look of someone deciding how much consequence to apply to a situation and already knowing they have more than enough to spare. Khyven's voice rose. I said, you're not going anywhere. The room went completely still. And Selim, wrist still caught, looked down at Khyven's hand, then up, not at Khyven, at Alaric, and something in his face, something very quiet and very decided, had already made its choice. Selim pulled his wrist free, not dramatically, no struggle, no scene. He just moved his arm, and Khyven's grip released the way grips release when they realize, in the moment of actual resistance, that they were never as certain as they thought. Selim stepped back. One step. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't carry a phone like most people did. He carried a small notebook. A habit from years before apps existed. From years of learning to communicate across surfaces and margins and whatever piece of paper was available. His handwriting was precise, quick, developed from necessity into something that looked almost like its own language. He tore a page from the back. The sound of it, small, clean, deliberate, was the loudest thing in the room. Everyone heard it. He pressed the page flat against the ledge of the terrace door. And he wrote 7 words. He wrote them slowly, clearly, without hesitation. Then he held the page out to Khyven. Khyven took it. Read it. The room couldn't see what was written, but they could see Khyven's face. That mattered. Because Khyven's face, composed through the whole evening, maintained through confrontations and frozen contracts and the systematic dismantling of everything he thought this night was, finally broke. Not into anger, into something smaller, something that looked, for just a moment, like grief. The kind that arrives when you finally understand what you've actually lost. Not as an idea, not as a consequence, but as a real thing. A real person. A real weight that's now absent from a space where it used to be. The 7 words on the page. You stopped choosing me a long time ago. Selim had already lowered his hand. He wasn't watching Khyven read it. He was looking at the ocean through the glass doors. The dark water, the distant lights across the bay, the moonlight spreading flat and silver across everything. And his expression was not sad. It was clear. The kind of clear that only comes after something has been fully said. The kind that's on the other side of grief, not inside it. Sometimes the quietest people deliver the loudest truths. Not because volume is unavailable to them, but because they've learned that the right 7 words, written clearly on a torn page, can do what 100 arguments never could. The room understood what had just happened. The investors who had been watching all evening, who had come here for deals and stayed for something they didn't have a word for, understood that they had just witnessed a moment. The woman near the exit had her hand pressed flat against her collarbone. The silver-haired shipping man was looking at the floor. Even Hendricks, who had already started his quiet exit 20 minutes ago, had stopped moving. Khyven was still holding the page. His hand had dropped slightly, elbow bent, page near his side, like he wasn't sure what to do with it. Selim turned away from the glass. He looked at Alaric, and he walked, not fast, not running from something, walking towards something. A distinction that matters, that the room could feel in the pace and direction of each step. He crossed the marble floor slowly, the ocean breeze still moving through the terrace panels, the moonlight still laying itself across everything. Khyven's voice came from behind him. Selim, once, just once. Selim didn't stop, and the room, every person in it, watched him close the distance between himself and the 3 brothers standing near the entrance. Alaric did not reach for him, did not take his arm, did not do anything except turn slightly, making space, creating a direction without forcing it. An invitation, not a claim. Selim stepped into that space and kept walking. Behind him, Khyven stood alone in the center of the room, holding a torn page with 7 words on it. And the silence that followed was the kind of silence that doesn't get filled. The yacht left the island at 11:42. No fanfare, no ceremony. The engines came up low and steady. The dock lines were released by 2 members of the crew, quietly, efficiently. And the vessel moved away from the private marina the way powerful things move when they have nothing to prove. Smooth, unhurried, gone. Selim stood at the rear deck railing. The island receded slowly behind him, the lit windows of the villa shrinking, the string lights dimming with distance until they looked like something decorative on a shelf somewhere, small and fixed and far away. He had left with nothing. No bags, no phone calls made, no dramatic last words passed through written notes. He had just walked out with the silk handkerchief still folded in his hand and the torn page already behind him, already in the past, already becoming the last thing that chapter would ever ask of him. The ocean wind was strong out here. Different from the wind on the terrace, bigger, saltier, less contained. It moved through his jacket and pressed cold against his face, and it did not feel like grief. Felt like weather, like the world just being itself. Indifferent and enormous and completely unbothered by the size of one man's betrayal. Behind him, on the island, the things that were already in motion continued moving. The 2 investors who had arrived together left separately within 15 minutes of Selim's exit. The woman who had been watching all evening made a phone call from the marina parking area. Her voice low, her face turned away from the villa. And what she said into that phone dismantled a proposed joint venture that Khyven had spent 11 months building. Hendricks filed an internal memo at 12:18 in the morning. Effective immediately, it said. Restructuring of operational partnerships. The 3 port corridor contracts that had frozen during the party did not unfreeze. By morning, 2 additional distribution agreements had been placed under review. The companies doing the reviewing all had, somewhere deep in their operational infrastructure, a relationship with Valtteri Logistics Holdings. Not coincidence. Direction. Khyven would spend the next several days making phone calls that were not returned at the speed they used to be returned. He would sit in meetings where the temperature was technically professional, but the alignment had shifted in ways that everyone felt and no one named directly. He would not go under. He was too large for that. But he would be smaller, quieter, more careful, and he would carry, somewhere in the back of his chest, the weight of a torn page with 7 words on it. Justice, when it arrived, had not been loud. It had not announced itself. It had simply walked out a door and stepped onto a yacht and let consequence do what consequence does. On the deck, Dorian came to stand at the railing a few feet from Selim. He didn't speak for a while, just stood there, watching the water. Then quietly, "He had no idea who you were." Not a question, just a sentence placed gently into the air between them. Selim looked at him. Dorian nodded slightly, at the island, at the whole evening, at the years behind it. Most people don't. Zephyr came up behind them both, resting his forearms on the rail, looking out at the open water ahead. The vast, dark, wide-open Atlantic that didn't care about any of this and never would. Alaric was last. He came to stand beside Selim. Not close, just present. The same quality of presence he had brought to the whole evening. Full, unhurried, certain. He looked out at the water for a moment. Then he turned his head slightly, not fully, and said, "Silence was never your weakness." Selim looked at him, then back at the water, and something in him, something that had been held extremely carefully for a very long time, braced against rooms that dismissed it and people who treated it like a gap, finally, slowly let go. Not all at once, just enough. The ocean spread out in every direction. The island was a cluster of small lights now, getting smaller, and the people the world had spent years ignoring, undervaluing, waving off with one careless hand. Sometimes those are the people that powerful empires quietly rearrange themselves to protect. Not because power is always kind, but because real power remembers, and it keeps its debts. That's the full story. If you found this story moving, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Every week there's a new story dropping about dignity, about power, about the people the world overlooks who turn out to matter most. Drop a comment below and tell us, whose strength surprised you most in this story? Selim's or the Valteri brothers? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support keeps these stories coming.